Orphan carried a native child out of blizzard. Next day, 500 warriors filled the riverbank. The wind screamed across the frozen wasteland of Kepler, 442b, tearing at Danny Carter's thermal suit with claws of ice. His oxygen readout blinked red. 15 minutes left, maybe less if he kept exerting himself like this. The colony's main dome was 3 kilometers behind him, and he had no business being out here in the first place. But he'd heard the cry, not through his comm system. Something deeper, more primal, a child's scream cutting through the howling blizzard like a distress beacon straight to his brain. The senior colonists had warned everyone about the native Kep population. Keep your distance. Observe but don't interact. Let the diplomats handle first contact. Standard protocol for any sentient species discovered on a habitable world. Danny had never been good with protocols. That's what happened when you grew up in 7 different foster homes across 3 different colony ships. Rules were just suggestions written by people who didn't understand what it meant to be alone. He spotted movement ahead, a small figure, barely visible through the white curtain of snow, stumbling between jagged ice formations. The child couldn't have been more than 5 years old in human terms, though the Kep aged differently. Its blue-tinged skin was already showing signs of frostbite, darker patches spreading across its small arms. The native species had adapted to cold, sure, but this blizzard was Category 5. Nothing survived Category 5 exposure without protection. Danny pushed forward, his legs burning with effort. The child collapsed just as he reached it. He scooped the small body into his arms, feeling how light it was, how fragile. The Kep child's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises that swirled like galaxies, silver and violet mixing in impossible patterns. Those eyes locked onto his faceplate, and Danny felt that same mental pull again. Not words exactly, but meaning. Fear, pain, gratitude. His oxygen alarm screamed. 10 minutes. The colony dome was too far. He'd never make it back carrying extra weight, fighting against wind speeds that exceeded 200 kilometers per hour. But there was an emergency shelter, one of the automated stations the first survey team had planted. Danny had studied the maps obsessively during the 6-month journey from Earth. Being an orphan meant being prepared, always having a backup plan, always knowing the exits. He changed direction, angling toward a cluster of rock formations that should hide the shelter. The child's breathing was shallow against his chest. Its small 3-fingered hand clutched at his suit, and Danny found himself talking, even though it couldn't understand English, even though his voice barely carried over the wind. "I've got you. Nobody gets left behind. Not on my watch." The shelter's beacon appeared through the snow. Danny's vision was tunneling, his oxygen gauge reading 4 minutes. He practically fell through the airlock, slamming the emergency seal button as they tumbled inside together. The silence after the blizzard was deafening. Danny pulled off his helmet, gasping for air as the shelter's ancient oxygen recyclers kicked in. The system was old, left over from the initial planetary survey 15 years ago, but it worked. That's all that mattered. He gently laid the Kep child on the floor, checking for injuries. The frostbite looked bad, spreading across its small torso now. The child's breathing came in rapid, shallow bursts. The shelter had a basic medical kit. Danny ripped it open, his hands shaking from adrenaline and cold. Bandages, antiseptic, thermal blankets, nothing designed for alien physiology. He wrapped the child in every thermal blanket he could find, then activated the shelter's heater. The temperature climbed slowly, too slowly. The child's eyes opened again, those swirling galaxy patterns fixing on him with an intensity that made his breath catch. It reached out one small hand and touched his cheek. The contact sent a jolt through Danny's mind, images flooding his consciousness. A village carved into ice. Crystalline structures that glowed with inner light. Tall, elegant Kep adults with the same swirling eyes. And then darkness, fire, explosions, people running. The child separated from its family during the chaos, wandering into the blizzard. Danny jerked back, his heart pounding. The child's hand fell away, but the connection lingered. Telepathy. The Kep were telepathic. The diplomatic corps would lose their minds over this. First contact protocols specifically covered telepathic species. There were procedures, psychological evaluations, trained specialists. But those specialists weren't here. Danny was. He checked his comm unit. The blizzard was jamming all signals. The colony wouldn't even know he was missing yet. He'd slipped out during a shift change, exploiting a gap in the security rotation he'd noticed weeks ago. Old habits. When you grew up shuffled between homes, you learned to notice patterns, to find the spaces where no one was watching. The child made a soft sound, almost musical. Danny turned back to find those eyes watching him with something like curiosity. He sat down beside the small form, careful not to crowd it. "I'm Danny," he said, pointing to himself. "Danny." The child's hand moved toward him again, more slowly this time, asking permission. Danny nodded and let the contact happen. This time the images were gentler, the child showing him its name, though not in words. A concept, a feeling of spring water flowing over smooth stones, fresh and clear and full of life. "Brooke," Danny said, translating the feeling into something he could grasp. "I'll call you Brooke." The child's equivalent of a smile, a slight brightening of its skin tone, told him he'd gotten it right. Hours passed. The blizzard raged outside while Danny did everything he could to keep Brooke stable. He shared his emergency rations, though the child could only manage a few bites of the protein paste. The kep probably had completely different nutritional requirements, but Brooke seemed grateful for the gesture, and that same mental warmth flowed between them each time their skin made contact. Danny found himself talking, filling the silence with stories from his own childhood. The foster homes on the Mars orbital station, the group home in New Chicago, the assessment center on Luna where they'd finally tagged him as unsuitable for standard placement and shipped him off to the colony program. Orphans made good colonists, apparently. Nothing to leave behind. No one to miss them if things went wrong. Brooke listened, or seemed to, those galactic eyes never leaving his face. And somehow, through the telepathic link, Danny sensed the child understanding. Not the words, but the loneliness behind them. The feeling of being unwanted, of wandering in your own kind of blizzard, looking for somewhere warm to belong. The storm finally broke 18 hours after they'd entered the shelter. Danny's comm unit crackled to life immediately. Colony command demanding his location. Security teams dispatching search parties. The medical director's voice, tight with controlled panic, asking if he was injured. He reported his coordinates and mentioned he'd found something. Someone, a native child. He kept his description clinical, leaving out the telepathy, the connection he felt growing stronger with each passing hour. They'd take Brooke away. Study it. Put it in quarantine. That was protocol. The rescue team arrived within an hour. 6 people in heavy cold weather gear, including Lisa Martinez from medical and Kevin Wright from security. They came through the airlock with scanners drawn, treating the situation like a potential contamination event. "Step away from the native," Kevin ordered, his hand resting on his sidearm. Danny didn't move. Brooke's small hand was wrapped around his finger, and he could feel the child's sudden fear through their link. "The kid's hurt, needs medical attention." Lisa pushed forward with her scanner, running it over Brooke's small form. Her eyes widened as she read the results. "Severe hypothermia, tissue damage. This child should be dead, but it's not," Danny said quietly. "We need to get it back to the colony. Quarantine protocols. We don't know what kind of pathogens." "Her name is Brooke," Danny interrupted. "And she's scared." Kevin's expression hardened. "Carter, you violated about 15 different first contact regulations. You're in serious trouble. Don't make this worse." Danny looked down at Brooke, at those swirling eyes that held galaxies. Through their connection, he felt the child's question. Trust them? He didn't know. But he also didn't have a choice. "It's okay," he whispered, squeezing the small hand gently. "I won't let anything bad happen to you." The promise felt enormous. Impossible. He had no authority, no standing in the colony, just an orphan who'd broken the rules to save someone even more alone than himself. But as they prepared to transport Brooke back to the colony, Danny felt something else through the telepathic link. A message being sent. Not to him, to somewhere far away, beyond the blizzard, beyond the frozen wastes. A call going out into the ice, carrying his name, his face, his promise. They separated Danny from Brooke the moment they reached the colony dome. Security escorted him to a holding cell while medical took the child to quarantine. The last thing Danny saw was Brooke's hand reaching for him through the transport pod's window, those galaxy eyes wide with betrayal. The cell was small, sterile, and familiar in the worst way. He'd spent time in detention centers before, back when he was younger and angrier about the hand life had dealt him. But this felt different, worse, because Brooke was somewhere in the medical wing, alone and scared, and he'd promised to protect her. Commander Patricia Shaw arrived 3 hours later. She was a tall woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too many colonies fail. She'd been leading Kepler 442b settlement for 8 years, and she didn't tolerate mistakes. Danny had heard the stories. Crew members who violated protocol got shipped back to Earth on the next supply run, their careers destroyed. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Shaw's voice was cold enough to rival the blizzard outside. Danny met her gaze. "I saved a child's life." "You violated quarantine procedures. You made unauthorized contact with a sentient alien species. You risked contamination of both populations. You could have started an interstellar incident." She leaned forward, her hands flat on the table between them. "The Kep have been avoiding us since we landed. We've tried for years to establish communication. Now you forced contact in the worst possible way. She was dying." We don't know enough about their biology to assign gender. Shaw pulled out a tablet, swiping through screens. Medical says the child is stable but unresponsive. Won't eat. Won't interact with our staff. Just sits there staring at the wall. Danny felt his chest tighten. Through the telepathic link, which apparently hadn't faded with distance, he could sense Brooke's distress. A wordless keening, like a radio signal broadcasting loss. She's looking for me. Shaw's eyes narrowed. Explain. So he did. He told her about the telepathic connection, the images Brooke had shared, the sense of understanding that had passed between them. Shaw listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled with each word. This is worse than I thought, she finally said. Telepathic contact without proper mental shielding or training. You could be experiencing any number of psychological effects. Imprinting. Suggestion. We need to get you to medical for a full neural scan. I'm fine. That's not your determination to make. Shaw stood, signaling to the guards outside. You're confined to quarters pending evaluation. And Carter? Stay away from the medical wing. That's an order. But orders had never meant much to Danny, not when someone needed him. He waited until the night shift, when the colony settled into its quiet rhythm. His quarters were locked, but the environmental controls ran through the same network as everything else. And Danny had spent his free time over the past 6 months learning that network inside and out. Another orphan survival skill. Always know the system. Always have a way out. The door clicked open at 0200 hours. Danny slipped into the corridor, moving through shadows he'd memorized during weeks of insomnia-driven wandering. The medical wing was in the colony's western section 3 levels down. He took the maintenance shafts, avoiding the main corridors where security would be patrolling. Brooke's room was in the isolation ward. Through the window, Danny could see her small form curled on the bed, those galaxy eyes open and unseeing. The moment he pressed his hand against the glass, her head snapped around. Recognition blazed across her features. The door was biometrically locked. Danny pulled out the maintenance override key he'd lifted from the engineering bay 2 months ago. It wasn't meant for medical doors, but the colony's security system was standardized across all departments. Budget constraints. The key clicked, and the door slid open. Brooke was in his arms before he could take a full step inside, her small body trembling. The telepathic connection flared bright, and Danny was overwhelmed by her relief, her fear, her desperate need to not be alone. He sank to the floor, holding her close, murmuring reassurances. I'm here. I've got you. I'm sorry they took you away. Images flooded his mind again. Brooke showing him what had happened to her village. Not just chaos and fire, humans. A rogue exploration team that had gone off mission, seeking rare minerals in Cap territory. They'd used explosives without scanning for habitation. The blast had destroyed half the village and triggered the blizzard conditions that scattered the survivors. Danny's blood ran cold. The colony didn't know, or worse, maybe someone in command did know and had buried it to avoid an interstellar incident. Brooke's people thought the attack was deliberate. That's why they'd been avoiding contact. They thought all humans were enemies. I didn't know, Danny whispered. Brooke, I'm so sorry. She pulled back, placing both hands on his face. More images. Brooke's family. Her mother, tall and graceful, with eyes like nebulas. Her father, strong and protective, both searching for her, both believing she was dead. And then something else. A message Brooke had sent during transport. A psychic call that had traveled across the ice, reaching her people. They were coming. Danny's comm unit crackled. Shaw's voice, sharp with urgency. All personnel to stations, we have incoming. Multiple contacts approaching from the north. Estimate 500 individuals. They're armed. Through the window, Danny could see the colony erupting into organized chaos. Security teams mobilizing. Defensive systems powering up. Everyone preparing for war. Brooke's hands tightened on his face. Through the link, he felt her desperate communication. Not war, not attack. Her people were coming for her. Coming for the human who had saved her when the storm tried to claim her life. Coming to see if all humans were monsters, or if maybe, just maybe, there was hope for something different. Danny looked into those galaxy eyes and made another impossible promise. I'll make them understand. Somehow, I'll make this right. Security burst through the door 30 seconds later. Kevin Wright led the team, his weapon drawn and pointed directly at Danny. On the ground. Now. Wait, Danny started, but Kevin was already moving forward. Brooke's scream was soundless but devastating. It hit every mind in the medical wing like a psychic shockwave. Security guards dropped their weapons, clutching their heads. Monitors sparked and died. The lights flickered. Through the link, Danny felt Brooke's terror translating into pure defensive force, a child's fear amplified by telepathic abilities she barely understood how to control. Stop! Danny shouted, placing himself between Brooke and the security team. Everyone stop! The psychic pressure eased. Brooke clung to Danny's back, her small hands fisted in his shirt. Kevin recovered first, blood trickling from his nose. "Carter, step away from the alien. This is your last warning." "Her people are coming," Danny said quickly. 500 warriors, you said? They're not here to attack. They're here for her, to see if we're the ones who destroyed their village." Kevin's expression shifted from anger to confusion. "What are you talking about?" "The rogue exploration team. 3 weeks ago, the mineral survey that went dark." Danny locked eyes with Kevin, praying the man would listen. They weren't killed by environmental hazards. They used explosives and kept territory. Leveled half a village. Brooke survived, but barely. Her people think we're hostile. "That's insane," Kevin said, but his voice held uncertainty. "We would never check the mission logs, the real ones, not the sanitized reports." Danny kept his voice steady, even as his heart hammered against his ribs. Someone knows what happened. Someone's been covering it up. The emergency sirens wailed. Shaw's voice crackled over the intercom. "All defensive teams to the perimeter. Targets holding position at the riverbank. Repeat, 500 plus contacts at the river. They're not advancing, but they're not retreating." Danny made a decision that would either save everyone or get them all killed. He grabbed Brooke's hand and ran. Kevin shouted behind him, but Danny was already moving through the medical wing toward the emergency exit. He knew this route. Had mapped it during sleepless nights, always planning for the moment he might need to disappear. Brooke ran with him, her small legs pumping to keep pace, trust radiating through their telepathic link. They burst out of the emergency exit into the frozen night. The colony's perimeter lights illuminated the scene like a stage. Beyond the defensive barrier, across the frozen riverbank, stood an army. 500 kept warriors, maybe more. They wore armor that looked grown rather than forged, crystalline plates that caught the light and threw it back in rainbow fractals. Each one stood taller than the tallest human, elegant and alien and absolutely terrifying in their stillness. Their eyes, all of them, swirled with the same galaxy patterns as Brooke's, and every single one of those eyes was fixed on the colony with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. At the front of the formation stood two figures who had to be Brooke's parents. Danny recognized them from the images she'd shared. Her mother's armor was more elaborate, marked with symbols that might have been rank or family lineage. Her father held a weapon that hummed with energy Danny didn't understand. Shaw was on the defensive wall, surrounded by security personnel with rifles trained on the kept force. She saw Danny emerge with Brooke, and her face went white with rage. "Carter, get back inside now." Danny ignored her. He walked forward, toward the perimeter gate, Brooke's hand tight in his. Through the link, he felt her sending messages to her people. Not words, feelings, safety, kindness. The human who had saved her when the world was ice and death. "Open the gate," Danny called up to Shaw. "Absolutely not. You've done enough damage, Carter." "They're here for her. For Brooke. They're here to see if we're monsters, or if maybe there's a chance we can coexist." Danny stopped at the gate, looking up at the commander. "And right now, we're proving we're monsters by keeping a child from her parents." Shaw's jaw tightened. "We don't negotiate at gunpoint. That's not how first contact works." "This isn't first contact anymore," Danny shot back. "We blew up their village. We killed their people. Whether it was an accident or negligence or a cover-up, we did it. And now they're here. Armed for war, but not attacking. Just waiting. Watching. Deciding if humanity deserves to exist on this planet." Lisa Martinez appeared on the wall beside Shaw. "Commander, the kid's vitals are spiking. The stress is too much. She needs to be with her family. If we open that gate, we're vulnerable." Danny felt Brooke's hand squeeze his. Through the link, he sensed her sending another message. Not to him, to her people. And suddenly he understood. The Kep weren't just telepathic with each other. When they bonded with someone, really bonded, the connection went both ways. Brooke had been broadcasting everything she'd experienced to her parents. Every moment of Danny carrying her through the blizzard. Every gentle word in the shelter. Every promise he'd made. They already knew humans weren't all monsters. They'd seen it through their daughter's eyes. But they needed to see it with their own. "Commander," Danny said quietly, "I'm going out there, with or without your permission. Because I made a promise to a scared kid in a blizzard, and I'm not going to break it now." Shaw stared at him for a long moment. Then, incredibly, she nodded. "Open the gate, but Carter, if this goes wrong..." "It won't," Danny said with more confidence than he felt. The gate slid open. Danny and Brooke walked through together, out onto the frozen riverbank, toward 500 alien warriors who could end the human colony in minutes if they chose to. Brooke's parents stepped forward. Danny could feel the telepathic communication happening, a whole conversation in the space between heartbeats. Brooke's mother knelt, her eyes never leaving Danny's face, and opened her arms. Danny released Brooke's hand. The child ran to her mother, and the reunion was like watching stars collide, bright and beautiful and overwhelming. Then Brooke's father turned his attention to Danny. The warrior was huge up close, easily 7 feet tall, with armor that seemed to pulse with inner light. Those galaxy eyes studied Danny with an intensity that made him want to step back. But he held his ground. Orphans learned early not to show fear. The Kep warrior extended his hand, not in aggression, in invitation. Danny understood. He reached out and made contact. The telepathic connection slammed into him with the force of a tidal wave. Not just Brooke's father. All of them. 500 minds touching his, reading him, learning everything he was in the span of a heartbeat. Danny saw his own life flash before alien eyes. Every foster home, every rejection, every night spent alone, wondering if anyone would ever choose him. And then the moment he'd heard Brooke's cry through the blizzard, the decision he'd made without thinking, the promise that had changed everything. When the connection broke, Danny was on his knees, gasping. Brooke's father steadied him with one large hand, and through the fading link, Danny felt something unexpected. Approval, respect, gratitude. Brooke's mother approached, still holding her daughter. She looked at Danny, and then at the colony behind him. When she spoke, it wasn't in words but in images projected directly into his mind. Her people had been watching the humans for years, wary of the newcomers who had arrived in ships that tore through the sky. They'd seen the mining operations, the expansion of the colony, the ways humans consumed and changed the land. And then came the explosion. The team that had devastated their northern village. The Kep had gathered their warriors, prepared for war, prepared to drive the humans from Kepler-I's 442b before more villages fell. But then Brooke had gotten lost in the blizzard, and a human had run into the storm without hesitation, without weapons, without anything but the need to save a life. The Kep were telepathic. They couldn't lie to each other, couldn't hide their true intentions. So when Brooke had shown them Danny's mind, his genuine care, his willingness to sacrifice himself for a child he didn't even know, it had created doubt. Maybe not all humans were destroyers. Maybe there was hope for coexistence. That's why they'd come to the Riverbank. Not to attack, to witness, to see if one human's kindness was an anomaly or a possibility. Danny felt tears on his face and didn't bother wiping them away. He turned to face the colony, where Shaw and her security team stood watching with weapons still raised. Behind them, he could see the rest of the colonists emerging, drawn by the commotion. Families, engineers, scientists. Ordinary people who traveled across the stars looking for a new home. They want to know if we're worth saving, Danny called out. They want to know if we can share this world without destroying each other. Shaw's expression was unreadable from this distance. Then, slowly, she lowered her rifle. Stand down, she ordered her security team. All weapons, stand down. The Kep warriors responded immediately. Their energy weapons powered down. The humming Danny had barely noticed fading into silence. The tension didn't disappear, but it shifted. From imminent violence to fragile possibility. Brooke's mother sent another image, a request. She wanted to see the colony, wanted to understand the humans better, and she wanted her daughter to show her, with Danny as guide. Shaw met them at the gate. She looked at Danny with an expression that held anger, exasperation, and something that might have been grudging admiration. You've started something neither of us can stop now, she said quietly. Good, Danny replied. Over the next hours, everything changed. Brooke led her parents and a delegation of Kep elders through the colony. Danny translated, though it wasn't really translation. The telepathic link allowed direct communication, sharing of intent if not exact language. The Kep saw human children playing in the common areas. Families eating together in the mess hall. The hydroponic gardens where colonists grew food in defiance of the frozen planet outside. And the humans, for the first time, saw the Kep as something other than distant aliens to be studied and feared. They saw parents who loved their daughter. Warriors who valued honor and protection. A civilization that had lived on Kepler, 442b for thousands of years, and had learned to thrive in harmony with its harsh environment. Shaw pulled Danny aside while the tour was happening. I found the mission logs. You were right. The exploration team used unauthorized explosives. The team leader falsified reports to hide the damage. Her voice was tight with controlled fury. He's in custody. There will be consequences. Tell them, Danny said, nodding toward Brooke's parents. They need to know it wasn't sanctioned, that we punish our own when they violate our values. Shaw nodded and did exactly that. The conversation was awkward, conducted through Danny's reluctant telepathic abilities and a lot of hand gestures. But the message got through. The humans hadn't attacked the Kep village on purpose, and the ones responsible would face justice. It wasn't enough to heal the damage, but it was a start. As dawn broke over Kepler, 442b, painting the ice fields in shades of pink and gold, Danny stood on the colony wall with Brooke beside him. Her parents had agreed to establish formal diplomatic relations. The 500 warriors had become an honor guard rather than an invasion force. First contact had happened in the worst possible way, but somehow, impossibly, it had led to understanding rather than war. Brooke's small hand slipped into his. Through the link, Danny felt her gratitude. Her people had a concept, she showed him. Not quite family, not quite chosen kin. Something deeper. Soul bonds. Connections that transcended species and circumstance. She'd bonded with him in that shelter, and that bond would last their lifetimes. You're not alone anymore. Brooke's feelings translated through the link. Neither of us is. Danny looked out at the frozen landscape that was becoming home. At the colony behind him, full of humans who'd traveled across the stars. At the Kep warriors on the riverbank who'd come in anger and stayed in hope. At this small alien child who'd chosen him, despite everything. No, he said softly. I guess we're not. For the first time in his life, Danny Carter belonged somewhere. Not because he was assigned there, or placed there, or had nowhere else to go, but because a child had cried out in a blizzard, and he'd answered. Because he'd made a promise and kept it. Because kindness, even in the coldest places, could build bridges between worlds. The orphan who'd carried a native child out of the storm had done more than save a life. He'd saved 2 civilizations from destroying each other. And in the process, he'd finally found what he'd been searching for all along. A place to belong, a reason to stay, a family that had chosen him back.